The medical bay smelled faintly of antiseptic, which was an impressive feat given that the air filtration system on the Veshek had to accommodate over 40 species. The overhead lights cast a cool blue hue, making the human skin look even paler than usual. Takar pulled up the bioscan results again, their four fingers tapping against the console as they reviewed the data. The readings were concerning. The human's internal structure had sustained significant trauma, in particular, the left femur, which showed signs of a hairline fracture along its midshaft. While not a complete break, the stress fracture was enough to cause severe pain and limit mobility. And yet, David was grinning. Takar had dealt with humans before. They had studied the medical texts, observed their physiology, even interacted with a few during routine examinations. They were, by all accounts, a durable species. But this was not normal behavior. David shifted slightly on the examination table, wincing as he tried to adjust his position. "Hey doc, be honest, how bad is it? Am I going to have to trade my leg in for a new one? Maybe something with thrusters." Takar blinked. "Your recovery is uncertain at this moment, but thrusters are not a medical option." David exhaled sharply, something between a chuckle and a groan. "Damn, guess I'll have to settle for the old-fashioned way." Takar observed closely. He was in pain, there was no doubt about that. The tension in his shoulders, the way he clenched his hands, the way his breathing hitched slightly every time he moved. And yet, he was making jokes. Takar adjusted the scanner and ran another diagnostic. Perhaps there was neurological damage. Are you experiencing confusion? Disorientation? David squinted at them. I mean, I'm in space with an 8-foot-tall lizard running my vitals, so yeah, I'd say things are a little weird. Takar's frills flared slightly. I am not a lizard. I am Veshek. David waved a hand. Right, my bad. No offense, he winced again as the scanner beeped. Takar exhaled and checked the results. The fracture was severe, but there were no signs of head trauma, no signs of delirium, no signs of cognitive impairment. And yet, the human kept talking like his pain was an afterthought. You need pain relief, Takar stated. David shrugged, which was another sign of his reckless disregard for his own well-being. I mean, yeah, that'd be nice, but it's not that bad. Takar stared at him. You are lying. David grinned again. All right, fine, it hurts like hell, but what am I supposed to do about it? Cry. Takar considered this. If that is your natural response, then yes. David laughed, though the sound was strained. Nah, Doc, that's not really how we do things. Takar tilted their head. I do not understand. David sighed, shifting again before immediately regretting it. He hissed through his teeth and let his head fall back against the table. It's just how we deal with things. You get hurt, you crack a joke. It makes it easier. Takar narrowed his eyes. You believe humor has medical applications? David gave a weak thumbs up. Best painkiller there is. Takar was unconvinced. They prepared a dose of analgesic from the med station and administered it carefully. David tensed at first, then exhaled as the relief took effect. Oh, that's nice, he muttered. Takar noted the change in his expression. This is the correct method of pain management. David smirked. Yeah, but my way's more fun. Takar did not respond immediately. They observed him for a long moment, watching as his muscles relaxed, but his demeanor remained unchanged. Still smiling, still making light of the situation. It was illogical, and yet entirely human. Takar made a note in their medical log: human patient exhibits excessive use of humor, despite severe injury. Possible psychological coping mechanism. Further study required. David raised an eyebrow. That about me? Takar hesitated before nodding. Yes. David grinned wider. Glad to know I'm a medical mystery. Takar did not say what they were thinking that, in many ways, all humans were. Takar adjusted the medical scanner, watching as the analgesic took full effect. The human's vitals stabilized, though his body still showed signs of strain. Takar had observed many species under similar conditions, and most exhibited predictable responses: lethargy, quiet endurance, or outright distress. David, however, remained oddly engaged, his expression retaining a flicker of amusement even as his body struggled to adjust. Takar retrieved a tissue regenerator, calibrating it for human biology. Every species required slight modifications to the device's frequency, and humans, with their rapid healing yet fragile soft tissue structures, needed specific parameters. As they set to work, David watched with open curiosity. His gaze followed every movement, occasionally flicking to the display screen. You ever get bored of this? Takar didn't pause. Elaborate. David gestured vaguely. Fixing people, running scans, patching them up, must get repetitive. Takar considered. The outcomes vary. Biological responses are not identical. Each case presents unique challenges. David exhaled. Guess that makes sense? Still, I'd go crazy doing the same thing every day. Takar angled their head. Yet you serve on this vessel. Your duties also involve repetition. David gave a lopsided smile. Yeah, but it's different when you don't know what's coming. Space likes to throw curveballs. Takar hesitated, recalibrating the regenerator slightly before resuming. Curveballs. David grinned. Oh, right, baseball. It's when something comes at you in an unexpected way. Takar filed the term under human idioms, then focused back on their task. The regenerator worked smoothly, knitting together damaged tissue, but the bone would take longer. Even with advanced medical intervention, human skeletal structures required time to reinforce stability. David shifted slightly, testing the sensation in his leg. Weird. Feels tingly. Takar monitored the readings. Nerve endings are adjusting to the accelerated healing process. It is a standard response. David nodded, then glanced at Takar again. You ever get injured? Takar's frills twitched slightly, infrequently. David smirked. That's a yes, but I don't want to talk about it answer. Takar didn't respond immediately. It was true that Veshek physiology was more resistant to fractures, but they were not impervious to harm. Still, discussing personal injury with a patient seemed irrelevant to their role. David seemed to sense the hesitation. Fair enough. Just curious how other species handle pain. Takar adjusted the regenerator settings again. Responses vary. Some species enter hibernation to recover. Others require external assistance for even minor injuries. There are those who regenerate entirely, though the process is inefficient. David raised an eyebrow. Regenerate? Like full limbs? Takar nodded. Certain species can regrow lost extremities, but the process is often slow and metabolically taxing. David whistled low. That'd be handy, though I bet it's a nightmare if you're missing something important for too long. Takar observed him carefully. Humans compensate for injury through external means. David grinned. Yeah, we do like our gadgets. Takar deactivated the regenerator and checked the readings again. The bone was still fragile but had begun knitting together. With proper stabilization, recovery would proceed as expected. David flexed his foot experimentally. So what's the verdict? Am I officially back in one piece? Takar secured a stabilizing brace over the leg. Movement must be restricted to ensure proper healing. Full recovery will take time. David sighed theatrically. Guess that means no zero-gravity sprinting. Takar's frills shifted. That would be inadvisable. David chuckled. Don't worry, Doc. I'll behave. Takar observed him once more. Despite the injury, despite the discomfort, David remained engaged, treating the situation with an ease that defied logic. Takar had witnessed resilience before, but this was something else entirely, an ability to endure while deflecting the severity of the moment. They made another note in their medical log: human patients engage in humor, not only as a response to pain but as an active method of reframing distress. Further observation required. David tilted his head. Making more notes about me. Takar met his gaze. Yes. David grinned. Hope I'm making your research interesting. Takar considered for a moment before responding. Undeniably. Takar adjusted the medical console, ensuring the stabilizing brace maintained proper alignment. The human's recovery was progressing within expected parameters. though his behavior remained perplexing. So, David's capacity for humor had not diminished with time. If anything, it had intensified. Takar had observed him over the past few cycles, noting the patterns in his speech. He frequently made light of his condition, often directing humor at his own limitations. When repositioning was necessary, he quipped about becoming a professional patient. When another crew member visited, he declared himself the reigning champion of sitting very still. The remarks served no practical function, yet they appeared integral to his mental state. Takar had seen many species handle prolonged recovery in various ways. Some withdrew into silence, others focused on meditation or external distractions. David, however, seemed determined to engage with everyone around him, maintaining an energy level inconsistent with his physical condition. Takar approached the examination table, reviewing the latest scan results. Your skeletal structure is reinforcing properly. Mobility exercises will commence soon. David gave an exaggerated sigh. Guess that means I can't just lie here and get pampered anymore. Takar blinked. You are not receiving pampering. You are undergoing treatment. Your recovery requires gradual reintroduction of movement. David stretched his arms above his head. Sounds thrilling. What's first? Obstacle course. Gravity resistance training. Takar retrieved the mobility device. You will stand. David raised his eyebrows. That's it. Takar tilted their head. You have not placed weight on the limb since the injury. Standing is a necessary first step. David exhaled, then swung his legs carefully over the side of the table. His expression shifted, still light, but more focused. He braced his hands against the surface, testing his balance before attempting to rise. The moment he put weight on the injured leg, his jaw tightened. His breath caught slightly, but he didn't stop. He adjusted, shifting his stance, gripping the medical frame for support. Takar monitored closely. Pain level. David gave a strained smile. Let's call it noticeable. Takar adjusted the support settings. You may reduce weight distribution temporarily. David exhaled through his nose. Nah, I gotta get used to it. Takar observed. The human was clearly experiencing discomfort, yet he continued, pressing through the adjustment period without requesting further assistance. His humor had not entirely vanished, but it had taken a backseat to concentration. All right, David said after a moment, testing his balance. I think I got it. Takar made a note. You are stabilizing. Next, forward movement. David took a cautious step. His muscles tensed, and for a brief moment he hesitated. Then, with deliberate effort, he took another. Takar monitored his vitals. Increased heart rate, minor strain response, but within safe parameters. No indication of excessive stress beyond expected discomfort. David exhaled sharply, then grinned. See? Easy. Takar narrowed their eyes. That statement is inaccurate. David chuckled. Yeah, but it makes me feel better to say it. Takar considered this. Perception alters response. David nodded. Pretty much. If I tell myself it's easy, it makes pushing through a little less awful. Takar recorded the observation. The human's approach to difficulty extended beyond humor. It actively reframed the experience. This was not simple dismissal of pain, but a conscious effort to minimize its impact through mental adjustment. David took another step, then another. His movements were cautious but steady. When he reached the far side of the medical bay, he turned back, expression triumphant. Not bad for a guy who was stuck in bed a few days ago, huh? Takar acknowledged the progress. Your mobility is improving at an acceptable rate. David laughed. That's the most enthusiastic praise I've ever gotten. Takar did not respond immediately. Their observations were clear. Humans utilized humor, not as avoidance, but as a tool for endurance. It was a method of reframing hardship, of pressing forward despite difficulty. They updated the medical log. Human psychological adaptation to pain extends beyond humor. Cognitive reframing plays a significant role in perseverance. Further study recommended. David stretched carefully. So what's next? Marathon training. Takar closed the medical report. You will sit. Recovery remains incomplete. David smirked. Bossy. Takar remained unmoved. Efficient. David chuckled as he eased back onto the examination table. His movements were slower, more controlled, but the sense of satisfaction in his posture was evident. Takar assessed the results. Progress was steady. Recovery was proceeding as expected. And yet, the human continued to defy conventional responses. It was not just resilience, it was a deliberate choice to engage with difficulty in a manner that reshaped the experience. Takar made a final note in the report: human psychological resilience requires continued observation. Mechanisms remain complex. Exploration ongoing. David stretched out his arms. So do I at least get a gold star for today? Takar blinked. You did not receive an injury-related reward. David laughed. Guess I'll settle for the satisfaction of a job well done. Takar observed him for another moment. The human's outlook was unlike anything they had encountered before. This study would require far more time. Takar reviewed the latest mobility scan, noting the incremental improvements in the human's gait. The stabilizing brace was still necessary, but David had progressed to independent movement within the medical bay, a development that followed no small amount of stubborn determination on his part. Takar had observed his efforts without interference, allowing the human to push through minor setbacks while ensuring no complications arose. David had fallen twice, both times brushing off concern with a quick remark before regaining his footing. Takar had documented the incidents, though they had refrained from commenting at the time. Now, as David leaned against the medical station, adjusting the brace himself, Takar decided to address a new observation. His recovery was within expected parameters, but his approach remained unconventional. The humor had not diminished, but it had shifted no longer a deflection, but an integrated aspect of his process. He still made unnecessary remarks, but they were not spontaneous, they were deliberate, calculated in a way that suggested purpose beyond simply alleviating discomfort. Takar observed the human's posture. His weight distribution favored his uninjured leg, but he was compensating efficiently. His endurance had increased. His interactions with the medical team remained consistent, but there was something beneath the surface, a tendency to assess his own condition before acknowledging difficulty. Takar adjusted the medical display, then turned to him with a direct question. Your injury remains an inconvenience. David raised an eyebrow. That's a polite way of putting it. Takar studied his expression. You persist in reframing difficulty into something tolerable. David smirked. Well, yeah, not much point in making it worse than it already is. Takar considered this. You believe perception alters experience. David tapped the side of his head. If I tell myself something's unbearable, it's going to feel unbearable. If I approach it like it's just another thing to deal with, it's easier. Takar processed the statement. Humans displayed a distinct capacity for adaptive thought patterns, but this went beyond endurance. It was an intentional restructuring of reality to facilitate progress. Takar made a note in the medical log: human cognitive adaptation extends beyond humor. Perception modulation appears intentional. Further analysis required. David shifted his weight again, testing the brace. His movement was smoother than before, though residual discomfort was evident in the tension at his jawline. He was not immune to pain, he simply refused to let it dictate his actions. Takar adjusted the mobility parameters. Your progress suggests continued improvement. However, unnecessary strain may result in setbacks. David rolled his shoulders. I hear you. Believe it or not, I'm actually pacing myself. Takar observed him carefully. Your definition of moderation differs from standard medical recommendations. David grinned. Yeah, well, humans aren't exactly known for taking things slow. Takar made another note: human recovery approach prioritizes progress over caution. Suggested study into long-term implications. David straightened, testing his stance. So what's next on the grand recovery plan? Takar remained focused. Incremental increases in movement will continue. However, your tendency to downplay discomfort remains a variable. David sighed theatrically. You really don't trust me to take it easy, do you? Takar's frills twitched slightly. Your actions suggest otherwise. David chuckled. Fair point. Takar observed him for another moment, then adjusted the medical report. The human's recovery was proceeding within expected biological parameters, but the methodology remained unique. Unique. This study would require continued observation. Takar watched as David took another step, this time across the medical bay without the use of external support. The human had insisted he was ready, and though Takar had reservations, the data supported his claim. His body had adapted to the brace, and his muscles had regained enough strength to sustain independent movement. David's gait was still imperfect, but he compensated instinctively. Takar noted the micro-adjustments in his posture, small shifts in weight distribution, subtle corrections to maintain stability. His body learned quickly, adapting even before he was consciously aware of it. David exhaled sharply when he reached the far end of the room. He turned, leaning casually against the wall, but Takar detected the strain beneath the movement. He was pushing himself, as expected. Takar approached with a medical scanner, confirming muscle response and structural integrity. Everything remained within acceptable thresholds. David grinned. Takar recorded the observation, then posed a question. Your progress is accelerating beyond predicted estimates. Does this align with your expectations? David tilted his head. Yeah, I figured I'd be back on my feet pretty quick. Takar considered this. Your confidence in recovery is based on prior experience. David nodded. Yeah, I've been through worse. Takar examined the statement. The human had not previously disclosed significant injuries. Clarify. David shrugged. Broke my arm when I was a kid. Took a bad fall during a training exercise once. Got banged up a few times in 0G. You get used to dusting yourself off. Takar processed the information. Previous experience with injury contributed to his expectations, reinforcing the cognitive adaptation observed throughout his recovery. Humans did not simply endure, they built upon past resilience, integrating it into future responses. Takar adjusted the medical report. Your physiological response to injury is consistent, but your psychological framework alters perception. You anticipate recovery as a certainty. David smirked. Well, yeah, bodies heal. That's what they do. Takar narrowed their eyes. That is an oversimplification. Recovery is not universally guaranteed. David exhaled. True, but thinking otherwise doesn't help, does it? Takar considered the logic. Humans approached healing not as a possibility, but as an inevitability. The mindset itself influenced outcomes, facilitating progress where other species might hesitate. David pushed off the wall, rolling his shoulder. So, am I officially cleared for duty, or do I need to fight a final boss first? Takar adjusted the medical display. Your mobility meets the required parameters. However, unnecessary exertion remains inadvisable. David grinned. I'll try to keep that in mind. Takar observed him for another moment. The human's recovery was not just physical, it was an active process of mental reinforcement, a deliberate effort to reframe difficulty into progress. The study was complete. The findings were clear. Humans possessed a unique resilience, not because of their biology alone, but because of their perception of hardship. They did not simply endure, they adapted, pushed forward, and redefined their own limitations. Takar finalized the medical report. David stretched carefully. So what's next? Takar regarded him steadily. You return to your duties. I update my research. David smirked. Glad I could contribute to science. Takar watched as he exited the medical bay, his movements steady, his mindset unchanged. The human had recovered. The study had concluded. No further observation was required.